Thank you all for coming this afternoon. We'll get right into a presentation that we're calling The Way Forward. First of all, in 2009, we think that there was a perfect storm that has never happened before in our industry. The impact of technology on the advertising business has been tremendous, but it was happening at the same time as there was a global economic downturn, one of the biggest recessions we've ever seen. And that created a real crazy situation for the advertising business. There's also a digital revolution that's taking place at the same time as we're moving into the information age. And I think the moving into the information age is something that I rarely hear people talk about. And I think it's a natural evolution from manufacturing and the industrial age, machine age, et cetera. But we don't know how far we're into it. And every year, everybody says the same thing. It's just never going to stop, and it's moving at such a fast pace. And all industries are challenged by these two components. Certainly, we know the music business has been extremely disrupted and changed forever. I think the most important thing to take away from the music business is that there's a lot more music, it's just distributed differently. Publishing is another hard-hit industry, whether it be magazines or newspapers, and we're in the infamous New York Times building right now. Again, I think people read more papers and magazines than ever, just again distributed differently because of the information age and the digital revolution. The entertainment business, I think, is something that a lot of people are not thinking will be disrupted like the music business, but it's exactly the same formula. The only difference is the size of the file, and the thing that gets cheaper every day, every minute, is storage. So we think that the movie business will go the same way as the music business. And of course, that leads us to advertising, which is changing dramatically. In fact, whether this is the exact number of months, it could be between 9 months and a year. But having been in the business for 32 years now, I think more has happened in the last 9 months to disrupt the advertising business than in the last 9 years. Clients are continuing to cut budgets, which is something that was in the Wall Street Journal today. I have two things that I'll talk about Sir Martin Sorrell, but one of them is he says the business will never be the same, and his projections were continuously off in the last few times that he made them. But there's a tremendous also squeeze on agencies to lessen their margins and to do things differently. I have a friend that runs a media company, and every morning he gets up, he's in another pitch. So it's even things that this large company has won very recently. They're just squeezing profits out of agencies. And the reason is because there's just been tremendous commoditization, and which is going to require reinvention, which is something that Barry's going to talk about in just a moment. One of the things that we've noticed, that I'm sure all of you have noticed, is the tremendous complexity of media today. So in the past, you'd get up in the morning and you might read a newspaper, which might lead you to listening to the radio or for instance, possibly reading some particular magazine that's important to your company. You may pass a billboard or two, watch TV at night, and possibly read a magazine. But that's all changed today with the incredible number of things that we're bombarded with. And I think it'll continue to get to be more and more leaks. Which leads us to a quote of Sir Martin. He said very recently, like a month ago, that the advertising industry can't return to what it was, but it's can return to what it was, but it'll never be the same. It's not going to be about the 30-second TVC and ads. It's not going to be about newspapers or magazine ads. It's going to be about Russia, India, China, Vietnam, and ... digital. That's very interesting that that's coming from the person who's running the largest holding company in the world. So what we need to do and how we're going to do it, I'm going to turn it over to Barry, and he'll take us through that part of the presentation.
Great. So all the things that Bob talked about in terms of the disruption of the industry and the complexity have really led us to these two questions that are the most fundamental ones in our industry. What is it that agencies do nowadays, and then how do they do it? And I think if you have the answer to these two things, that's really what the way forward is all about. So let's start with, what do we do?
I think you have to point it at it.
You have to point at it. I don't know, it's not doing it. Did you?
Watch this, guys.
That's why he's the CEO. Which one did you hit?
This one.
Okay.
I hit forward.
I hit the stop button. So one thing to think about when you think about the advertising industry business and what agencies do, it's always been rooted in this idea of the campaign. That's what agencies do for clients. They create these campaigns. And campaigns come and go, as we all know. There are a few campaigns that have lived on for a long time, but they're constantly refreshed with new pieces of creative. And I think even as ad agencies have migrated themselves into the digital space, they've tended to approach it from the standpoint of the campaign. So taking the cue from what I think is one of the greatest agencies out there today in terms of doing campaign work is our friends over at Crispin. And just looking at their work last year for Burger King, they started at the beginning of the year with this brilliant campaign called Whopper Freakout, where when visitors showed up to a Burger King location in Nevada one day, they were told that the Whopper had been discontinued. And they filmed all these people having a freak out over their favorite sandwich being removed from the menu. And that became a big video that played on the web. Traditional television drove people to that web experience, and millions of people went and looked at Whopper Freakout. And then a little later in the year, they came up with another brilliant campaign, which was called Whopper Sacrifice. And the idea with that one was that if you give up 10 friends on Facebook, you get a coupon for a free Whopper. And I think they were tapping into this really amazing cultural insight that we're all on Facebook now. I think they just announced the latest numbers. Over 300 million people are now members of Facebook. But often we don't even know half the people that we become friends with on Facebook, so we're willing to give up 10 acquaintances to get a free Whopper. And then they ended the year with another great campaign. It was called Whopper Virgins. And the idea here was that they found people who lived in the most remote corners of the earth that had never tasted fast food and had never had advertising for fast food sort of permeate their consciousness. And they brought these people to the US, and they did a head-to-head taste test of the Whopper versus the Big Mac. And of course, if you've never had fast food, Whopper, I guess, tastes better to these virgins. 3 brilliant campaigns. All 3 of them were very successful. Millions of people came and viewed the online components of these campaigns. A lot of participation, a lot of viral activity behind them. But campaigns are always in this cycle, and it's even true when great agencies like Crispin do campaigns in digital. It follows this cycle of up and down. When we're running a campaign and we've got media in the market, our audience grows. And as soon as we pull that media, or as soon as the campaign has run its course and all the people have seen the Whopper Freakout video or the Whopper Virgin video, the audience dissipates again. And then we're on to the next campaign, and we're always in this up and down cycle. And that's pretty much what the entire agency business has been about, correct? Well, I think something has happened in the digital arena, and again, this thing is not working, is that we've seen the rise in the last 5 years of what we call platforms. And the idea behind a platform is that it's something that's not a campaign. It's something that's built to last. It's not something that's launched into the market with a lot of media behind it, looking for its audience with paid media. We're seeing platforms that go into the marketplace, and the audience grows over time, and people continue to use these things. And so when we define a platform, we're talking about something that is rooted in utility. There's something about this platform that a customer is drawn to, and that the customer can find occasion to use again and again and again. And so they integrate these platforms into their lives, and they use them over and over, rather than just looking at the Whopper Freakout or the Whopper Virgin site once and sort of having the giggle and moving on. A platform is something that they're going to revisit it time and time again, and they're going to integrate it into their life. And that in turn creates what we call owned media. So it's media that the brand actually owns, rather than renting eyeballs on someone else's property. This is a destination that a brand might own, where people aggregate, and it has reach and frequency just like any other media channel, but it's actually owned by the brand. And often these things trigger what we call earned media because they're rooted in innovation. And so customers share them with each other across all of their social networks. I think a great example of a platform, and this is one that is in the space of Nike. And if you think about Nike's history in the main category in which they compete, which is in running, they started in the early 1970s as a specialist in running shoes. And over about a 20-year period of time, they grew to become the market share leader through great innovative products and through amazing campaigns, largely done by agencies like Wieden and Kennedy that created this massive audience of runners that were all drawn to the Nike brand. But really, starting in about the mid-90s, they started to lose market share in running shoes. Their competitors like New Balance and Asics were actually probably making better products at the time. And Nike was beginning to lose its core audience of runners to these competitors. And they were in a situation where it was almost impervious to advertising. There was no ad campaign that Nike could run that was going to bring these runners back. Runners leaving the brand just felt that Nike no longer made product that was great, that was relevant to their lives. And then you got to the point where Nike couldn't launch new products and get trial because runners weren't willing to test these new products again. And so they found themselves in a very difficult situation. And in 2006, RGA and Nike partnered to create one of the first platforms in running called Nike Plus. Nike Plus is an example of a platform. It's not a campaign. It's something that was launched in the market in 2006. The audience for Nike Plus has grown over time to the tune of many millions of people who use this thing every week, and it's integrated into their life in a very meaningful way. The latest stats on Nike Plus is that the community of Nike Plus runners has logged over 160 million miles in the last 3 years. And the average, well, actually, it's been sold all over the world. There's runners in about 160 countries that use Nike Plus. And the average Nike Plus user visits the website 3 times per week on average to look at their stats, to track their progress, and to see how they're doing in the various challenges that run inside of the Nike Plus universe. And it led to this famous quote by Trevor Edwards in the New York Times, actually, just about 2 years ago, where he said, "We're not in the business of keeping the media companies alive. We're in the business of connecting with consumers. People are coming into Nike Plus on average 3 times a week, so we're not having to go to them." And that's this idea of owned media, where the brand Nike now owns this media destination that draws runners in on an ongoing basis. And in terms of the business impact of Nike Plus, in about the first year that it was in the market, Nike's market share in running shoes went up about 20%. So this is a dramatic growth, obviously, and it's something that I don't think traditional marketing could have ever solved. This is exactly the power of these digital platforms as they're integrated into people's lives to really drive the business metrics that matter to all of our clients. So when we think about platforms, we look at, instead of this up-down curve that we saw with campaigns, there's something that grows over time. The audience for a platform continues to grow as more and more people adopt it over time. And in fact, campaigns can run on top of these platforms, and campaigns are often the way that people discover them for the first time. But unlike the old scenario where the audience drops off at the end of the campaign, if we've used a campaign to recruit you into one of our platforms, we then have you for into perpetuity. And it starts to look more like this sort of staircase where every campaign brings more people into the platform that then stick with it over time, growing the audience for that platform. And I'll show you an example of a campaign that we ran last summer for Nike Plus, and it was called The Human Race.
On August 31st, 2008, history was made when Nike hosted the world's largest running event, the Nike Plus Human Race. The first global 10K, it featured races in 28 cities around the world. each with its own live concert at the finish line featuring top artists. But it wasn't just the size that made it historic. It was the fact that it couldn't have happened without the Nike Plus platform. Because for the first time, participants had a choice: run in an official race city, or run anywhere in the world by using Nike Plus. As the lead agency, it was our job to connect people to the race in the digital space and beyond. The Nike Plus Human Race site was designed to help bring together runners all over the globe, whether they shared the same location, charity, or power songs. Users could join running teams, train together, and challenge each other. And nothing says world unity like some good old-fashioned trash talk.
Hey, football jocks, you think you can run more than one down at a time?
New York, want me to call a cab for you at the halfway mark?
Hey, Lance, stick to cycling. You can need all your gears to keep up with me.
Athletes and celebrities were more than happy to join in through online videos.
You mother truckers want a race?
Let's run the world, baby!
The videos were seeded out as online exclusives and housed on a YouTube brand channel. And let's not forget music. To boost runners on 10K training runs, Nike Plus sport music mixes combined expert coaching with adrenaline-pumping beats. Excitement for August 31st began to build, until finally, race day arrived. Runners sounded off in video booths on how it felt to make history. Meanwhile, people all around the world were running their 10K anywhere they wanted, thanks to Nike Plus. As race results came in from around the world, they were displayed on the site. Users could even commemorate the event with their own personalized race day book. People began flooding photo sites like Flickr, SmugMug, and PhotoBucket as the buzz spread around the world. When it was all over, the numbers were unprecedented. 800,000 people ran in 142 different countries, running 2.5 million miles, and competing in 280,000 new Nike Plus challenges. But perhaps more importantly, millions of dollars were raised for 3 global charity partners. And it couldn't have happened without putting a sensor in a shoe and pairing it with the world's largest online running club.
So the human race is an example of a campaign running on top of one of these platforms. We'll look at one other platform in a different category, which is football. The challenge with football is that the only kids who actually buy this gear are high school kids. So you have a very narrow window of time in which to sell product to them. And so this is an example of a platform that we built to help recruit kids in at the beginning of their football career and get them to stay with this thing the entire time that they're playing high school football. By the time they graduate from high school, if they're still good enough to be playing at college, they're getting their gear for free. So we have this narrow window of about 4 or 5 years in which to sell product to this particular audience. And so this is called Head to Head, and it was launched at the beginning of last year's football season.
They live for the hit, the fingertip catch, the pancake block. But how do you keep high school football players pumped for the game when they're not in their pads? You create an interactive tool that's useful in every aspect of their football life. With Head to Head, Nike Football introduced a platform that changed the way players scout their opponents, motivate themselves, and train to become better at their position. At its most basic, Head to Head is a stat comparison generator that produces a visualization of your stats versus an opponent, any opponent of your choice. Let's say you set your bar high, and you'd like to see how your season is measuring up against NFL MVP LaDainian Tomlinson. A couple of clicks and your stats are side by side. If LT's got an edge on you in 2008, a quick scroll will show how your stats compared to his last year, when he was in college, or even high school. With Head to Head, you can compare yourself to any player, at any level, at any stage of their career. And that includes your current competition. Want to see how your numbers stack up against your cross-state rival? Simply enter the names and an instant head-to-head comparison materializes on the page. For the high school player looking to take his game to the next level, Head to Head is an essential tool for knowing where he stands in the ultra-competitive football landscape. But that's only half the story, because what's a head-to-head comparison if not a motivator for improvement? Are your receiving yards coming up a little short? Simply click on that stat column to launch a video tutorial from All-Pro receiver Hines Ward. Or maybe your open field tackling could use some work. A quick click and Pro Bowler Lofa Tatupu is taking you through the proper form and technique. So behind the stat-driven motivation is a video-driven education from the NFL's best players, one that's easily downloaded to an iPod and taken out to the practice field. And how do you launch a tool that's going to bring both football training and scouting into the digital age? You promote it in the right online spaces, and you see that it drops at the same time as an epic TV spot featuring 2 of your premier athletes going head-to-head themselves. Part number cruncher, part data visualizer, and part video trainer, Nike Football's head-to-head gives players the tool they need to get stats, get motivated, and get better.
So they're in there week after week looking at their stats, comparing it to their rivals. The scouts from colleges and universities have now gotten in on the act, and so they're in there using it as a recruiting tool, which is drawing even more kids into this platform. And I think this is another great example of something that's an owned media destination for Nike in a different category of football, but it's something that these kids are going to use the entire time that they're playing that sport, and so it's a place that Nike can rely on for this built-in audience over time. So I think we've covered off on a lot of what we think that agencies do today. We think it's this combination of building these platforms for clients as well as creating campaigns around them as really being the biggest opportunity of the digital age. It's where we've seen the most success with our clients is in the creation of these platforms and in the construction of campaigns that are used to support them. And that, I think, leads to the next question of how do agencies do it? How should agencies be organized to seize the opportunities of this digital age, as we call it? I think it starts with this very simple insight, that there's a formula that really drives our industry, that technology comes along and it completely transforms the lives of consumers, and this in turn creates opportunities for agencies. It also creates opportunities for media companies like the New York Times, and it creates opportunities for brands, but we're going to tell the story from the point of view of the agency business. And in the last century, this technology emerged called television, of course, and it created this consumer that had never been seen before, this mass aggregated consumer, millions of people all watching the same thing at the same time in this very passive manner where they were open to receiving advertising messages. And really, I think there were three people who were the pioneers of this creative revolution of the 20th century, David Ogilvy, Leo Burnett, and Bill Bernbach. And really, the three of them were the pioneers of the agency model of the analog age, and they went on to build massive global agency brands that employed thousands of people around the world, and to this day are still very large companies in their own right. And they were the geniuses who I think are the inspiration for a lot of what we do. I think what was so interesting was how simple the model of the agency was. Those of us watching Mad Men can see this playing out in real time. The ad agency model that was created in the 50s and 60s was rooted in two creative disciplines coming together, the copywriter and the art director working side by side. Media was still integrated inside of the agency, the planning and the buying of media. The account managers functioned both on the business development side as well as the client partnering side to help make the relationship run smoothly. And if you've been watching Mad Men, you just saw they had a big reorg at Sterling Cooper in last night's episode. And they organized into creative, media, and account management. Those were the three overarching ways that the agency was organized. This model was so powerful and what they were doing was so important that typically their client was the CEO. It wasn't even the CMO. I'm not even sure if CMOs existed back then. They were working with the owners of companies and the CEOs of brands because what they were doing had such a big impact on the business. And it largely stayed unchanged for the next 20 or so years. It wasn't until the 1970s that we saw some changes in the model of the ad agency. For one, media was pulled outside of agencies and it was put inside of a specialist company, the media planning and buying firms. And we saw the rise of a new role inside of the agency called account planning. And the job of the account planners was to use a bit of social science and research to get to insights that the creative team could leverage to make their work more targeted and more on strategy. And then over the next 20 years, we saw the rise of all these new marketing disciplines like direct marketing and branding and events and PR alongside of the other things that existed. Interactive came along in about 1995 with the rise of the web. And all of these things were built as siloed companies. There was never any thought that inside of the traditional agency structure, if we just had a few more people, we could do more things for our client. Instead, all of these things were built as silos, as separate business units, or as just completely separate companies. And many of them relied on production companies on the back end to execute their work, so the picture got complicated even further in terms of the ecosystem of the agency business. The clients began to replicate this sort of siloed structure of agencies by creating their own internal silos, and they all had their own client teams inside of each agency. And this is largely the picture that we're confronted with today, where we have a client that's looking for an idea, a big idea that can somehow move the needle and work across all of these channels and disciplines. And they're leaning, for the most part, on that team on the far left there, the traditional agency team. But that team had become a factory for the creation of TV spots. And so that team is not really equipped to solve these larger issues of what clients need in this new digital age. And yet this is the structure. I think if you go look at the websites of any major ad agency, you'll see all of these silos just listed on the site. So you can just see the whole model sort of playing out in action in real time, even today. And unfortunately, our little formula came along again, where technology transforms consumers, and that in turn creates opportunities for agencies. And we saw this new technology emerge called digital, and all of its incarnations and forms, from the web to mobile, to all the digital stuff that confronts us as we just go about our lives here in New York City with all the digital signage all over the place, even in the backs of the taxi cabs, of course. And this has created this entirely new consumer. So we're no longer mass aggregated. We couldn't even be more fragmented, harkening back to that chart Bob showed earlier that just shows our media lives and how diverse they are today. And this relationship, in turn, I think, is creating opportunities for new agencies like RGA. We're certainly not the only one. There's a lot of agencies that are out there that are pursuing new models today. We're only one of many. But I think there are agencies that are trying to figure out this new technology relationship between digital and the consumer, the way that Ogilvy, Bernbach, and Leo Burnett figured it out in the 20th century. And I think at the core, you have to look at how agencies are modeled to respond to this new challenge. So just looking at the model of RGA, and like I said, we're just one model among many. We have 3 strategic disciplines that we combine inside of our agency. We have planners. Planning has evolved. It's no longer about just getting to insights that can inform a piece of communication. We need insights that can drive a platform, for instance. So the role of planning has changed dramatically, and that could be the topic of an entire another presentation. Media has been brought back inside of the agency. We look at it as more of a connections approach. It's not just about what you can buy with paid media. We think one of the biggest opportunities is what we were talking about just a few minutes ago with unpaid media, with earned media, with consumers passing media along between each other. So we need people who can think very broadly about media, not just about what we can buy, but also what we can earn or what we can own as a brand. And then analytics is core to everything that we do. We need to be able to measure everything that we do. And also because we're proposing that our clients make investments in these things like platforms, we need the ability for them to model these businesses going forward and see what they're likely to pay out in terms of ROI. That's combined with 3 creative disciplines inside of our agency: interaction design, copywriting, visual design, and then everything is rooted in technology. And that's probably the biggest difference between an agency like RGA and traditional agencies is the role of technology inside of the agency. About a quarter of our staff are technologists, as an example. And that's what gives us the ability to create these platforms like Nike Plus or Head-to-Head. All of these things are still managed by account managers, but they're also partnered with producers. In our model, we produce about 95% of what we conceive of. That's very different from the traditional model where you come up with an idea and then you outsource the production of that idea to an outside production company. We produce most of what we conceive of, and so we need producers who are partnered with the clients to make sure that the work gets done. And we've even added something that we call Digital Studio, which is our ability to create linear content at a very low cost, but at a very high level of quality. And that's driven by the insight that clients today have the opportunity not to have little 30-second pieces of content that they can deliver to consumers, but they can have hours worth of content. The only challenge is how to make this stuff at a cost-effective price. And I think you saw that in Head-to-Head, for example. I think there's about 40 or 50 different videos that make up that experience. And so if we would try to bring the production model of broadcast over to work like that, there's no way that it could have ever happened. And this is really the model of what you need if you want to get into the business of creating platforms and delivering campaigns that drive people to these platforms. And that's largely what we view our job as for our clients. And we've built RGA to interface with very senior clients. Again, we need to be able to have the audience with a senior person because we're often bringing innovative ideas. And if you're not working at the right level, those things will always get killed. And I guess the last point, and I think this is a really important one, is that as you add new things to an agency model, you can't think about the silos that were created in the 1970s and the 80s and the 90s. Everything has to be integrated back horizontally into the organization. You can't have these standalone things like we saw in that chart earlier in this presentation where there are silos, because the silos will end up competitive with each other, and they'll never be integrated into what clients need. And I guess the last point is that the business is really challenging because what Bob said earlier is the diversity of output is almost staggering. Looking at what we do as an agency, everything from applications that we're writing to campaigns that run inside of a mobile space to technologies that we're deploying inside of a retail store channel, the diversity of output is quite dramatic. I think if you look at it, it largely kind of falls into three buckets. There's what we might call campaigns. Campaigns are what I talked about earlier. They tend to be short-lived. They're about delivering a message to a particular audience. They rely on media. They're rooted in a message. Those are contrasted with what we might call programs. These are the domain of CRM, these ongoing communication cycles where a customer sort of opts into a stream of communication from a particular brand, and they're ongoing and iterative. And then lastly, there are the things I talked about in the examples before of platforms that are systems of interaction that people integrate into their life and they use again and again. And those are much more longer lasting. And I think if you look at the three agency models that are evolving today, it goes back to this set of tools that agencies sort of have at their disposal for clients. On the one hand, you've got a model of an agency like Crispin, as I mentioned earlier, or Goodby. These are among the best traditional ad agencies that have really done a great job of migrating into the digital space. And their model is largely rooted in the idea of campaigns. You have all the amazing direct agencies like Draft FCB, Digitas, Rap, and Wonderman, whose heritage is more in direct marketing and CRM. And as their work unfolds, it aligns a little bit more with that program line that I showed earlier. And then, of course, you have agencies like RGA, Razorfish, AKQA that come out of digital. So just looking at these models, the Crispins and the Goodbys, what do? They primarily do campaigns. How do they do it? The creative is mostly in-house, and the production has been historically out-of-house. Most of these agencies are building in-house capabilities, but historically, the execution of these ideas has largely gone to outside production companies. The big direct companies, Draft FCB, Rap, they do campaigns, but on top of that, they also do these programs that are rooted in the CRM. Creative is in-house. Analytics, very critical to what they do, that's in-house. But for them, production is largely, again, an out-of-house kind of model. And then that leads to the third model of digital agencies like ourselves, AKQA, Razorfish, and others. We're kind of playing in all of these things, but they're all digital. We do campaigns, we do programs, we do platforms. Most of these things only live inside of a digital context. The creative is in-house, the analytics are in-house, and the production is in-house as well. So I think that's kind of a landscape of how the agency business is unfolding. And all agencies need to sort of map themselves against where they might fit here or come up with something completely different. That's a new opportunity. I'll turn it back to Bob. We'll talk about who makes it.
I'll be brief, and then hopefully we could take a couple of questions. Finding the right talent is a very big challenge right now. There's people that are thinkers, there are people that are conceptual, and there's people that are doers. And I think that combination in the digital space is getting more and more complicated. Because the people that come out of the digital space don't really know storytelling all that well. And ones that come out of the traditional agency backgrounds don't understand systematic, integrated communications the way that it works in the digital space. So the writer and the art director that Barry pointed out earlier would be up in this space, and they would probably do some production, a business RGA used to be in. Or they could go to if they're going to do something digital, probably a company that could systematically put together a campaign and a program in the digital space. What's happening now is it's becoming a complicated integration of people and ideas that has never happened before. So again, the right talent, there's a huge gap right now. Some of it is being taken up by the universities like Rick's program at Brand Center, where they're trying to bring the presentation that Barry talked about earlier, capability-wise, into the new agency business. There's a democratization of tools, which has made it a lot easier to get into the business. People learn a lot about our business from their friends and from just being young. The way forward for agencies is really something that they've been missing for a very long time, is a DNA capability in collaboration. Coming out of the feature film business and TV business, commercials, one is naturally collaborative, but agencies are more fiercely competitive in the way that they work, even amongst themselves and between sister agencies. A lot of consulting has opened up for agencies now in the digital space, where one can compete with the McKinseys or the Accentures, et cetera. And in some areas, we're starting to compete with other consultancies like IDEO. I believe that big agencies will get smaller. I don't see I think that they have to somewhat deconstruct and then regrow their models, which could become, as Martin Sorrell said earlier, they could get back to the agencies of the past, but they're going to have to deconstruct and regrow based on the model that Barry was showing, whether it's our model or another new model out there. And the smaller agencies will need to specialize, and everybody's going to need to integrate better with partners, because clients are going to put together best-in-class resources the best way that they can. And I think it'll look more like what agencies did to production companies, clients will do with agencies, and they'll sort of pick parts and pieces that are best in class, put them together in the US and internationally and globally. And one will need to be either the best at what they do or perhaps the least expensive. This is the last slide, and it's a very obvious one that customers are changing, but we think that agencies have lost track of that change. I think that day in, day out, we actually think about, well, what would a consumer or customer do, and base our campaigns around that. They certainly have more choice than ever before. They certainly have a larger voice. And as people are getting tired of hearing the consumer is in control. But nevertheless, I don't necessarily think that agencies are designed to take advantage of that without making fundamental architectural, structural changes in their agency models.